Okay. It should give you a thing that you got to click.
Yeah, it's done.
Okay. Yeah. It always does the recording in progress message right in my ear now that I got a pair
Yeah.
of burner headphones to plug into this microphone so that it's not making crazy reverb all over the place, which is nice.
Yes.
But welcome back, everyone, to part two of the Horus Heresy saga. Where spoilers up to and including a little bit parts of Fulgrim, which is the fifth novel in the Horus Heresy. There are some audio dramas that go in between, but I haven't listened to those yet. I have access to them, but I haven't done it yet. So, well, I'm sure we'll get there when we get there. But this is my friend
I've never
Brow,
actually.
and yeah, we're gonna nerd out for a little bit.
I was gonna say I've never actually listened to most of the audio dramas associated with the Horus Heresy.
Oh, really?
Uh,
Hmm.
there's so much adjacent material that like if you wanted to cover everything, you would literally like read and consume nothing else for years.
Ooh.
Uh, and which I mean, it's a great setting, but I've never wanted to spend the time to track down like all the audio dramas, and I've
Aren't
heard they're
they
really good.
aren't they all on Black
Uh,
Library? The app?
yes, but navigating Black Library to figure out exactly what is where and what has or hasn't been duplicated in an anthology they did later, and uh, so
I can see
I'm
that
sure. Like
being difficult.
I've heard they're good, but it's also one of those things where like the cost to benefit tends to go down the smaller the product that Black Library is selling you. Uh, their prices for their main novels and novellas are fairly reasonable,
Mhm.
but the price doesn't go down that much, even if it's only a like hour and a half long audio drama.
Yeah, that's not commensurate. So no, no.
So
Mm.
it was like when Amazon was insisting that you should buy ebooks for 95% of the price of a physical book. And it was like, really, guys? Like, you're sending me a file as opposed to a physical item that needs warehousing and shipping and like I could physically hold on to.
Yeah,
And there's like incremental costs per book that you sell, whereas like once you've created an ebook, there is like effectively no marginal cost per extra copy you sell.
hmm. Yeah, it's just and another way to bilk people out of money. Be like, this is what we're doing. We had a programmer
Yes.
read the file, the original file that the author sent, and then we paid like a font specialist to put it together, and now we're just going to reproduce it ad nauseum forever.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So if they were like, hey, because our costs went way down, the author is getting like a significantly larger cut of ebooks because our profit margin went way up, so we're going to like cut the author in on more of the profits. Then I might consider it, but for the most part, authors get the same or even less money because in a lot of cases, publishers were using the argument that there was nothing physical to deal with, so there wasn't, so an ebook was worth less to pay authors less for their ebook sales, but they were charging the same. Well, they had less cost. So on the one side, they were they were arguing the same argument from different directions depending on who they were. Um,
Up against.
yeah, which answer better served their financial gain.
Mm, mm,
But we're kind of
a
drifting off
little,
topic.
little far afield. A little far afield. It happens.
Uh,
What do you got?
so I was going to say the one thing that we didn't cover before that I think is worth talking about is the Primarchs that we have seen so far, because we've
Right.
seen a good percentage of them at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
In one POV or showing up to an event or another.
yeah, I think we've seen 7 um, in the first 4 books,
Rogel
because
Dorn,
obviously
Fulgrim,
Horus,
Horus.
Well, we in the first book we see Horus, obviously,
Uh-huh.
Dorn, and Sanguinus, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, who shows
That's the
up.
one I couldn't remember his
Uh,
name of.
then in False Gods, I believe in. Sorry, I'm just going to check my notes here to make sure I'm saying the right
Because
books.
don't we meet Fulgrim in False Gods?
In False Gods, I believe we meet Fulgrim and Angron, both like towards the end of
Mhm.
the book.
And then there are major players in Galaxy in Flames, or at least
and
their people are.
in False Gods, we also kind of sort of meet Magnus.
Yeah,
In
he showed up. He showed up during the astral projection chaos dream that Erebus was emceeing that day. He's being the master of ceremonies for your propagandistic astral projection fever dream.
and then in Galaxy in Flames, we meet Mortarion, the Lord of the Death Guard.
We don't see very much of him until Flight of the Eisenstein.
No, but he shows up in a great sequence where Eidolon, who clearly thinks that he should be considered of a status with the Primarchs because his isn't there at the time.
Yeah.
And very quickly informed by everyone that no, just because his Primarch is not there doesn't mean that he gets to act at the same level as
Yep.
the Primarchs that are there. Now, Angron, in his typical fashion, comes very close to just killing Eidolon outright for his
temerity, I think is the term.
Yes. Which actually probably would have been a good thing in hindsight if
Angron's a problem. Angron is himself a problem.
Well, yes. Angron was not subtly named. Angron has anger issues.
Yes. I think that's putting it mildly.
They get into more, but it's something I find interesting that the Primarchs in many ways are similar, but also in many ways different. They're all even to Space Marines, like this tier above them that's demigod, even to guys who are interacting with them on an almost daily basis. It's
they talk about the force of their personality being
yes,
it's like having a ridiculously high charisma stat, and so it doesn't matter who you're talking to. Even people who aren't a part of his legion and whatnot they all feel they're the presence of whatever Primarch that they're in.
And it seems to almost get magnified the more Primarchs there are in one location.
Really,
3 or 4 Primarch, one Primarch is a crazy, ridiculous thing that most people are weeping, most mortals are weeping or barely able to control themselves at the sight of it. And then at 2 or 3 can basically just completely shut mortals down because of they're just so oversaturated.
Which kind of explains what happens to the Remembrancers, because Ignatius Carsi, bit of a problem of a man. I think that's putting it mildly. He's always hitting on everything. He keeps swearing he's not going to drink anymore, and then he goes out drinking some more. But he does want to tell the truth with his writing, even if it is pompous and arrogant and everything else, because he is that. But there's just some things he can't do. It doesn't matter what he's able to write about. Nothing. No one. He's not stopping. What's coming.
And there's I'm not spoiling anything by talking about this, but there's a scene in a much later book where there are a bunch of human soldiers fighting somewhere,
Mhm.
and Sanguinus goes out to like raise morale and like show the flag, and that like they're not just on their own, abandoned by like the wider Imperium, like
Mhm.
Sanguinus. And as it's happening, like they show the POV from like one of the soldiers, and like afterwards, Sanguinus goes back somewhere, and they're like, "My lord, that was a great success. 98% of the troops' morale has never been higher. It's literally impossible to like improve the morale. 2% are dead. They just couldn't process how fucking awesome a person you are. It just broke their brains and they died."
Oh, oh, that's hilarious. Oh my God.
Because like Sanguinus is like
He
is
would.
basically a literal like angelic demigod.
Yeah. And
Like he
isn't he
has
like one of the Emperor's favored?
yes, and like he was considered like Horus said that Sanguinus should have been War Master.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, Partially because like every Primarch embodies like some aspect of both the Emperor and humanity as a whole, like magnified beyond.
Mhm. That's why they're also their emotions swing about all the place, all over the
Yes,
time, like all
so
over the
like
place, all the time.
Angron is like anger manifested
Mhm.
basically, whereas Sanguinus is like glory and majesty, like just amplified to like ridiculous extremes.
Okay.
Um,
So then what would
um,
Horus be?
like
Evil?
Horus, no, I think Horus is ambition, like just like pure, like because Horus, even though even
I'd
though
see
Horus
that.
was the first Primarch found,
Hmm.
he's kind of always trying to compare himself to the other Primarchs, make sure
Hmm.
that in the comparison he comes out ahead. Um,
He's a political animal.
that he's a political animal, and like he's a highly effective general, warlord,
Hmm.
warrior. Uh, but everyone needs to know that Horus is a like is amazing at existence.
Hmm. He has to be
Uh,
the best.
like Mortarion is just like the sheer will to survive and keep going.
It's kind of exemplified by
Um,
their planet, which is like poisonous.
yeah, Fulgrim is like perfection,
Hmm.
which like they don't even try to pretend that like the Emperor's children are not about perfection.
Hmm.
Uh, Dorn is about like duty and loyalty, just like
Hmm.
as we see in Flight of the Eisenstein. He can't even comprehend a world where someone betrays the Emperor,
Hmm. Which is why he was so
because
pissed throughout that entire thing. When
well because
Garrow has to give him the news of everything that's
yeah,
happened at Istavan 3, because Istavan 5 hasn't happened yet. And
yes,
he's so upset by it, he's trying to find any excuse just to execute him. And
well exactly, well
that way
because
it wouldn't be
Dorn
true.
is there, well, and Dorn is there, and it's like this, like this can't be true. You're telling me that like not one, not two, but like four of my brothers have like renounced their oaths, turned their back on the Emperor,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's not even like I think to a certain extent he's like I think he actually says at one point, like if you were coming and telling me that like Angron has gone mad and has like degenerated to the point that he's just like a feral killing machine or something, like,
Mm-hmm.
but he's like Horus, uh, Fulgrim, like madness.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And then he spent like the next day like by himself, just smashing things apparently,
yes,
which is sad.
Well,
But
like he almost killed Garo just by like backhanding him, and
Mhm.
Garo was in like full armor.
Mhm.
Um, so you can imagine what happens when a Primarch gets angry and wants to just break things.
I hope they're insured.
Um, uh, but it's also interesting that uh, the Primarchs are, despite the fact that they're like artificial creations, they are brothers. Like they're some of them get along better with each
Mhm.
other. There's like petty rivalries between different ones. Some of it's, healthy competition that, like I want to prove that I'm tougher or, better at this than my brothers are, and others are actually like barely on speaking terms because um like they're just so different, or in some cases it's because they're so different. In some cases it's because they're so similar.
Mhm.
Uh, and some of the most different Primarchs get along really well, and some of them absolutely despise each other.
Mm. Because
Um,
it seems that people respect Magnus, but they also are like, okay, but we don't really talk to Magnus.
yeah, well, I mean, we haven't learned that much about Magnus other than that his like psychic power is ridiculous.
Yeah, and that
Um,
he was censured for studying sorcery and sent to a backwater planet
yes.
over it.
Well, he was sent back to his homeworld, uh,
Mm.
uh, to kind of like go home and think about what you've done, uh, kind of thing. Uh,
Didn't
but
stop him though.
no, no. Uh, and there's a Primarch at this point who's been name dropped, but we haven't actually seen on screen yet. Ferrus Manus,
Mm-hmm.
who is said to
Iron
be
Man.
Fulgrim's
His name is
Fulgrim's
Iron Man.
yes. Um, uh, but is said to be Fulgrim's best friend among the Primarchs. Like
Oh, okay.
they were so close, but it's said specifically in, I think it's False Gods, but it might be Galaxy in Flames. Like the reason why Fulgrim is late to Istvan is because he went to talk to Ferrus to
Uh-huh.
convince him to join the rebellion.
We see the aftermath of that in Galaxy in Flames. And
Yeah, where
Horus is
Fulgrim
so
comes and says, "I
mad.
failed."
Yeah, because Horus is pissed that he wasn't able
Well,
to do what he said he was
because
going to do.
because both Fulgrim and Horus, like it wasn't even like, oh, this is likely going to work. Like they were so convinced that the bond between Fulgrim and Ferrus was so tight
Mm-hmm.
that like it was just a done deal. If Fulgrim showed up and said, "Hey, New World Order, you in?" Like they figured it was going to be a slam dunk. But Fulgrim and Ferrus
Mm-hmm.
uh, are like polar opposites of Primarchs,
Yeah,
uh, but
you could
are
say
like
Fulgrim's preening, and you wouldn't be wrong.
yes. Um, but we haven't really seen Fulgrim or Ferris, so I don't really want to get in that much to him at this
Mm-hmm.
point to avoid spoiling things. But like he is very different from Fulgrim. But then you have like Angron and Fulgrim, who are also vastly different. And Angron hates Fulgrim because he just thinks he's a like preening
And he is.
preening fool, which he kind of is. Um, it's although, and I think in Fulgrim's case, it's more that um, he's being too laissez-faire about controlling his legion
Mm-hmm.
because he's let guys like Eidolon rise to the top.
Yeah, and Eidolon, as we're shown, is not a good officer. He's not a good
No,
officer at all. He takes credit
well,
for
he's
other people's work. He
he's
refuses to listen to Tarvitz or anybody. He's just a
well,
giant prick.
he's very good at making himself look good to
Yeah,
his boss.
I destroyed the stone trees. That was me.
Yeah, yeah. After Tarvitz showed that it worked, then I jacked him up for it. Then it appeared that it worked, and then I took credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Piece of
so,
shit.
but but there are several Primarchs who are bad judges of character of the senior Astartes that they promote.
Mm.
Like Mortarion didn't have a great track record of picking captains for his grand companies.
Yeah, look at Grogu.
Well,
Grogu's
exactly.
a giant dick, just a giant absolute phallus, just a flopping about, flaccid.
And the thing that I found really interesting about him was that like he's constantly like trying to lord things over Garrow, but like he and Garrow are like he's like here and Garrow is here. Like they're both captains of like grand companies.
Mm-hmm.
His just is a lower number, which means that he's ever so slightly ahead in the food chain.
Mm-hmm.
Like
So
it's not
they
like
call him first captain.
well, but he isn't even first captain. That's Typhon.
Oh, you're
Or
right. Who is also a giant dick, but for different reasons.
yes,
Mm.
but he's at least not just like an asshat to like his peers.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, not all the Primarchs are great judges of who their senior officers should be, which is part of the reason why we end up with a bunch of problems.
Like Torgadon was a good captain. Loken was a good captain. I don't know how I feel about Garrow yet. It's odd that the worship of the Emperor is starting right about this time, which I want to get into a little bit because we're seeing all types of interesting sort of things now start. What was originally being made fun of by the Remembrancers in the very early parts of Horus Rising ends up becoming super important the longer it goes on.
So Garrow is interesting because Garrow shows this tension that exists in all the legions to one extent or the other. This tension between Terran legionnaires and legionnaires from other, like primarily their homeworld, though other recruitment worlds in general. Because all the legions started out with recruiting from Terra, and then as they expanded from the Sol system at large.
Because everyone keeps making fun of him for his old Terran customs, like having a house Carl.
Yeah. So, but every legion to a certain extent has those challenges. But it depends largely on how long it's been since they found that legion's homeworld in Primarch, how fresh those tensions still are. Like the Luna Wolf Sons of Horus, these tensions are long sorted because Horus was found very, very early on in the Great Crusade. The vast majority of Sons of Horus are not from Terra and haven't been for like centuries. Whereas later Primarchs, and I'm going to go consult the Wikipedia article or the wiki article about Primarchs on Lexicanum to make sure I have this right. Where is Mortarion? Here we go. Mortarion was found 13th of the Primarchs.
Makes
sense. So much
sense.
later in the process. So there's still more Terrans, especially at senior ranks, in the Death Guard than there are in the Sons of Horus. I think the only Terran Son of Horus that we see is the Half Herd.
Cruz or Kurz. Is it Cruz or Kurz?
I think it's Kurz. Although I'm never an expert on a pronunciation of these things.
Because there's Conrad. I thought it was Conrad Kurz, and he was Iacton Cruz.
Yes, Cruz.
Ha!
So
victory.
But it's and he's an interesting character because, like, there are basically no Space Marines at this point that are more than about 2 centuries old.
Yeah, and he's a boomer.
Started and
he's a total boomer.
But
it used to be better back in my day.
40K, in 40K, 2-century-old Marines are like common. Like it would be shocking in a lot of Space Marine organizations in 40K to find a senior officer who wasn't 2 centuries old.
The younger ones just get killed too
so-
quickly, or they're all from a similar batch?
Well, it's just like Astartes don't get killed very often.
Right.
So, right now, they're mass producing them constantly. Like the Astartes are growing like rapidly because they're producing.
Do they
them faster
actually
than they're dying.
reproduce like in a traditional sense?
No. Space Marines are sterile. All the stuff that they do. But one of the
so they literally
the
have battle and
implants-
nothing else. Wow.
Yeah, they are warrior monks basically.
Huh.
The monk aspect isn't that prominent at this point.
Mhm.
But one of the 19 implants that Space Marines get are and I'm going to the Wiki article to make sure I get this right, are the progenoid glands. Every Marine is implanted with a pair of them.
Mhm.
And over time, somewhere between 5 and 10 years minimum, they kind of absorb stuff from the Marine and create miniature versions of all the organs that are required to create another Marine. So they can either remove them while the Marine is still alive and transplant them into another Marine, or generally what they do is they harvest them at the death of a Marine, or they do some combination thereof, because a lot of apothecaries believe that the longer the progenoid gland has to mature in the Marine, the better the product that comes out of it is. But there's always a risk if it's in the Marine that like critical wounding could damage them, or there's not an apothecary available to recover them. And they're trying to grow the legions as fast as possible. So there's kind of this balance between the two. Though I think at this point, they can also create, they can make Marines through other means at this point as well. I think, because they still have access to Primarchs and a lot of the lore that the Emperor used to create Marines in the first place.
Because it's like the Primarchs were trying, like, an effort for the Emperor to make more of himself, and then they didn't quite hit the same heights as the Emperor's perfection, blessed may he be. And then from the Primarchs, you get the Marines as sort of a genetic copy in an inferior sized model.
Yes. So the Primarchs were intended to be kind of the generals for the Emperor, because the Emperor can't be everywhere.
Right,
like,
but
it's
he
a
made
big
them
galaxy.
from like bits of his own DNA.
Yes, but like they're like purely artificial creations. There's no, like, the Emperor didn't take an infant and like turn it into a Primarch.
Right.
The Emperor created the Primarchs from scratch, whereas Marines, they need, ideally they take preteens and turn them into Astartes over about a 10-year period.
With the enhancements and all of that.
With the enhancements, because
and they still have to go through training at the same time, right?
Exactly. So they're like doing they get a surgery, do some training, get another surgery, do more training, over about a 10-year period is the kind of ideal timeline.
Am I wrong in thinking that each legion has a different sort of, what would you call it, first 10-year class?
Yeah, recruitment protocol.
Yeah. So like,
yes,
on Mortarian's homeworld, like you've got to be like stabbed with poisonous needles and you got to deal with a lot of poison, basically poisonous
Yes,
gases,
well,
poison
because
needles, all that other stuff. So I'm just wondering what if it's a different legion, they're still going to put them through just as much danger, but it's going to be of a different kind, is what I'm thinking.
yes, and those are generally driven by the personalities of the individual Primarchs and
Mm-hmm.
the home worlds that they're from. Because they don't want, like, they want to start with good quality material before they enhance them.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like going back to the Halo example. When they were creating Master Chief and the other Spartans, they didn't just pick like 150 random kids. They like selectively picked like the perfect specimens, or as close to the perfect specimens as they could get, to end up with the best final product.
Of which 117
now,
is obviously the best example.
Exactly. Now, in the hierarchy of like genetically augmented or artificially created beings, you have the Primarchs at the top, and you have the Space Marines like here. In between, you have the Custodes, who are the Emperor's personal bodyguards. Now, they are like the Primarchs are pure artificial creations, like kind of a one-off major project to create them. Once they were lost, the Emperor didn't try to create like a second generation of Primarchs. He just went on to other things because it wasn't worth the investment of resources again. The Custodes are like bespoke creations. They're each individually kind of they take like children, males of a similar age to Astartes, but where Astartes are like your factory produced super soldier. Custodes are like your bespoke, handcrafted super soldier.
Oh, okay.
And they're designed for different purposes. Like the Astartes are designed to be an army. They're designed to fight as an
They're
army.
the biggest mailed glove you can get.
Custodes are designed to be bodyguards and not necessarily fight as an army. They're designed to fight more as individual warriors.
So they're much more discreet in their structures.
I've seen it described as Astartes are wolves. Like they're a pack and they fight as a pack of wolves.
Right.
And Custodes are more like a lion, where like they fight on their own. They're individually incredibly powerful. But if you have multiple lions in a fight, those lions probably aren't coordinating their actions.
Right.
Whereas like a pack of wolves is like deliberately coordinated in how they like attack a prey. So like wolves, if they're like hunting fast prey, will actually like cycle off which wolves are like actively chasing the prey so that like the entire pack doesn't get exhausted, because they would need one or two of them chasing the deer for the deer to keep getting exhausted. The others can be further back and maintaining a less strenuous pace, and then they'll cycle off, or they'll attack from different directions in coordinated ways. Lions just kind of like lions rarely fight more than like individually. And even if they do, they're not really coordinated in the same fashion.
Because it seems whereas as a wolf, wolves will do like the bite and turn, and then there's another one there when they try to run and bite and turn. And with lions, they just kind of pick a target, and then that they're going to attack that target until it is dead.
Yes.
And then they're going to, if they have to pick another target, they will. But that seems to be the style.
So, but it's kind of that, are they fighting coordinated or are they fighting as individuals mentality? Like, and then of course below the Astartes you have other enhanced people that aren't to the same scale of any of the actual super soldiers. And in this time period, they can turn older people into Space Marines. Just the odds of success get lower the older you get. In this
Oh.
period, they're relatively effective into like your early 20s.
Mhm.
But theoretically they can try it up to like 40s or 50s. Your odds are not very good.
But it could happen.
But it can happen, and in a lot of cases, because most of the Primarchs, like Horus was found, they've never really defined exactly how long Horus was on,
Gothic?
was like
Gothic?
separated from the Sithona.
Okay, yeah. The language they speak is Gothic.
Yes, they've never defined how long Horus was on Sithona before the Emperor found him.
Mhm.
But anything I've seen implies that he was like either a teenager or a young adult. Like he was maybe like in his early 20s when the Emperor found him.
Mhm.
There are other Primarchs who were found like decades after they arrived on the planets that they were scattered to.
Mhm.
So, well, in most cases, they've unified their homeworld before the Emperor finds them, because
Mhm.
they're Primarchs and like they're dealing with unaugmented mortals in most cases. Like
Yeah, so they're
the
going to
Primarch
become
is,
dictator of that planet pretty quickly.
yes, in some way, shape, or form. Uh, but of course, by this point, they've been on a planet for decades. They have like advisors, friends, generals, bodyguards, who like when the Emperor shows up and is like, "Hey, you're a Primarch. How would you like to command a legion?" Those guys are like, "Hey, hey, Fulgrim, are you just gonna leave us behind?" So most Primarchs have a few guys who at least tried to become Astartes,
Hmm.
because they didn't want to be left behind. In some cases, there were guys, I don't think we've seen any of them yet, but there are a few guys floating around who they couldn't actually, they were too old to actually make Astartes, but they kind
Hmm.
of got a bespoke augmentation regime to get them as close to Astartes as possible. So they could
Hmm.
still live for a long time and could still like uh, join the Legion in some capacity.
Hmm.
Not necessarily as a frontline warrior, but um, to not be left behind when their boss or friend like shifted in and went to the stars.
Yeah, got super promoted. So I really
Yes.
like all the work you've done here. Now I just want you to repeat that same result over and over and over again on everyone. You'll get a little task
Yes.
force to use, and it'll be yours. You have fun with that. All right, bye.
So I think the other thing you'd wanted to talk about was the growth of the Imperial cult as opposed to the Imperial truth,
Right, because
which is
the
starting
the
to,
imperial truth is like radical atheism.
well, it's like, yeah, it's radical atheism, but it's also like the primacy of science,
Right.
which is weird considering you have the Adeptus Mechanis there, who are like a scientific cult of uh, like
And they're the ones who took over
religious.
Mars and run the Mechanicum.
Yes, but they run most of the Imperium's tech,
Mhm. So
and
spaceships, all that stuff.
they worship that tech. So at the same time, the Emperor is like, science is primary. Like I'm not a god, despite the fact that like I incredibly powerful and like do all this crazy stuff. Like he's actively working with a cult of scientists.
Uh, and
Uh,
was his entire plan all along to become a god? Was that his plan?
that is unclear, because we never get inside the Emperor's head.
Hmm.
Certainly at the point where the Emperor, I don't think has actually ever shown up on screen at this point.
He does in set book 2, False Gods, in flashback.
Oh, he shows up in a flashbacks. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
but he doesn't actually
But
show up.
but kind of like Anamander Rake in Malazan Book of the Fallen, where like he would be diminished if you ever got inside his head.
Yeah, yeah, I gotcha.
Like, so it's certainly what we know to this point. It's unclear whether the Emperor intended it to be that way or not. But I would argue that the Imperial cult is partially starting to spread because the Emperor is now gone. Like,
yeah, he's just on Terra.
Until Olenor, he was traveling around. He was leading campaigns. Yes, he would be on Terra for a few years. Then there'd be an important campaign, and he would leave. And like, but now the Emperor is gone. The Emperor has handed over the work of the Great Crusade to Horus primarily, but the Primarchs as a whole. And he has returned to Terra to prepare for the next, what comes after the Great Crusade.
Universal compliance.
Losing the Emperor being gone kind of increases his mystique.
Yeah.
And kind of increases the legend associated with him. Because even if he is insanely powerful, and everything that the Emperor is, when you actually see him, in some ways, you can buy that like he's not a god, because like there's physically someone there,
right?
But when he's a story that's thousands of light years away, like, is he even real? Is he a concept? Like, so I think that happening is kind of starting to cause this this rise of the Imperial cult. Although that was probably always kind of brewing under the surface anyway. Because
there's one thing about humans, they love to worship things.
Well, and even what we've seen of the Emperor to date, like, it's hard to make an argument that the Emperor isn't a living god with the amount of power that he has.
He can reasonably show up anywhere at any time and clean anyone's clock just as soon as he shows up. So functionally, pretty much is.
When he has created effectively demigods and claims to be their father, like what is the father of a demigod?
You leave off the demi?
Yeah, exactly. So
let me see if I have this right. So the worship of the Emperor is kind of, it's been growing like exponentially for a little bit, but it's also seen as like a classless thing to do, or in bad taste, basically. Because we see all kinds of people who are like, they're saying like the sayings about the Emperor and whatnot in their day job, and people are like, are you serious? Are you fucking doing this shit right now? Do you have to do this shit right now? Like,
but at the same time, we see that it works. Like in and like they don't even take long to show us that it works. Like, it is in Horus Rising that we see like the Emperor's power as a god manifest through someone else.
I thought that was at the end of Galaxy in Flames.
No, it's towards the end of Horus Rising, when the Iterator and the Remembrancer are trying to like translate the Book of Logar, and they use Erebus's, the runes that are like tattooed onto Erebus's
and they open a
they
summon a demon or some shit.
Yes. and like, and then the one remembrancer who like is like the primary believer in the Imperial cult,
Uh,
like basically just through faith in the like the Emperor protects,
mm,
like protects, and it at least partially is responsible for banishing said demon.
mm.
Uh, so like if the Emperor didn't protect, then like how did she do that?
Through orcish faith.
Yeah.
Wow.
So because they've already established that she's not a psyker. Like this wasn't a
Mm.
psychic ability that manifested and she could do that.
What's
She's
what's
not a
her name?
psyker.
The one who gets sacrificed in the next book.
Oh, the astropath.
Yeah, she
Um,
was there, I thought. Was she
yes,
not?
and she also helped banish it,
Okay.
but only after it was kind of stopped by the saint.
Is
Uh,
Euphrates the saint, or am I getting?
no, Euphrates is the saint.
And who's the other one?
I
The one
believe so.
who takes pictures.
Uh, why am I forgetting these names? These are I didn't write down the names of the remembrancers, but but yeah, uh the emperor is clearly somehow, whether it's just that she is able to somehow tap into some aspect of the emperor's own psychic ability and then channel it herself indirectly. Um,
Okay.
but it's also something that like in setting, um, kind of like in Malazan again,
Mhm.
um, like worship grants power.
Right. And like the
Uh,
belief of the Astartes and their Primarchs makes them much more powerful than they normally are, I think.
yes, but also like so the at this point the Imperium of Man spans the majority of a galaxy.
Mhm.
It it which means that its human population is in like the trillions, the tens or hundreds of trillions, even
Mhm.
maybe even more than that. Like if even a small percentage, and it seems like from what we see in the first four books that you know a couple percent of the fleets maybe are members of the imperial cults. Maybe not even that. But if we
Mhm.
call it like 1%,
It's still a lot of
what
people.
is the power that results from like 1% of 500 trillion people? You know, like 5 trillion people believe you're a god. What, even if you say like I'm not a god, you know, like I have no like godlike power, but 5 trillion people believe you're a god.
Mhm.
Like that's probably not going to have zero impact on
Hmm.
whether you are god or not. You know, again, we
That's
talk
right.
about Rake.
Yeah.
Rake says he's not a god. Other people are like, you're a god. And it doesn't matter that Rake says he's not a god. Granted, these are completely separate universes,
Right.
but like Rake says he's not a god. Yet there is still a mortal sword of Rake
Right. They
floating
they
around.
made sure to make that position known, which they picked their best
So
swordsman among them or fighter among them to give them the title. It's what everybody else
yes.
does.
So so um I think at a certain point, whether the Emperor intended to be a god or not, he's kind of lost control of that choice at this point.
Mm.
He
Because
is
it seems
going to
that they're
become a
actually able to
god.
get him to pay attention through prayer, like because he
So
stops that demon because she says, it wasn't me, it was the emperor, and the emperor protects.
yeah, the
And
Emperor
then
protects.
when the mute guard, the one who had his like throat taken out basically by the
Oh,
remembrancer, like the high
the
class remembrancer lady,
the one who looks down on all the other remembrancers because they're not as well like bred as she is,
Yes,
and like
yes,
assumes that like because of her breeding, she's the one that's entitled to be like the personal remembrancer to Horus. And
yes.
Horus is
Fair.
just kind of amused by the pretension of it, and it's kind of like, this amuses me. So we'll roll with it.
Mm. She, her guard, her bodyguard, that guy, he
Yes.
tries to kill him, and then I'm not entirely sure what happened. She hit him with light. What did she do there? Was it like a priest spell?
Well, I think it was again basically like the Emperor protects,
Mm.
um, and the Emperor protects. So um, we have not seen the last of the first saint of the Emperor.
Oh, I didn't
Uh,
think so, especially because she went among the Sisters of Silence at the end of Flight of the
yes.
Eisenstein, which the
So
Sisters of Silence are another entirely different level of what the fuck are they? Like not they're like they seem to
so
be like female Astartes equivalent.
so the Sisters of Silence, you may have noticed they weird everyone out around
Yes,
them.
yes.
Um,
That's why I like them.
so
If I'm quite honest, that's why I
so
like them.
uh, Warhammer obviously has like magic is all psychic in Warhammer. They have psychers, they don't have magicians. Although there is talk of sorcery, although whether sorcery is just like what people some version of psychic power or not at this point we don't know. Um, Sisters of Silence are the opposite of psychers. They are
The
anti-psychic.
blanks.
They are actually called blanks at some point. So they project like an anti-psychic ability.
Ah, fascinating.
So so
That
and
makes sense.
they have
Because when the baby was like in Garrow's head,
yes.
and then the Sister of Silence shows up and the baby flees.
Yes. So
Ah,
different Sisters of Silence. So there are different power levels within psychers.
mm,
Like the Emperor is at some ridiculous level, like way off the chart that like people are like, he's a psycher. Trying to measure him is like impossible.
mm.
Um, and
And you call him the most powerful
Malkador is
psyker
there
who ever
like
lived.
they're like we know Malkador is less powerful than the Emperor, but otherwise, like he's still insanely powerful.
Mm.
Uh,
And he's the
and then
sigilite.
yes, uh, and then you have people who go from like kind of latent abilities that occasionally trigger through to like active control and then better control and stuff. So there's a whole hierarchy of psychic ability. On
As there
the
should be.
anti-psyker side, so the blank, null, there's a few different names for it.
Mm.
There are also kind of levels of anti-psycherness.
Ooh.
Um, so so some of them it's that like kind of they themselves can't really be affected, and then the more
Mm.
powerful you are, kind of the radius of the effect that you project.
Mm.
uh, so like a basic Sister of Silence at a low level might just be able to, like, they themselves can't directly be affected by a psychic power,
Mm.
whereas the like higher level, the stronger ones, are actually projecting that aura that like protects Garrow from the like alien mind baby.
Yeah. And the alien mind baby is was a powerful enough psyker to see his future.
Yes.
Which so how does that work? Like the being able to see the future stuff. How can that be anything else but magic?
Well, they haven't really explained that at this point.
Fair.
But that will not be the only time that people get visions of the future.
Hmm.
Um,
So I felt bad for the house Carl. He didn't deserve to go out like that. He was a good boy, even if he did
but
fail
he went
being an
out like a
Astartes.
boss. But he
Yeah.
went out like a boss.
He's got his head cut off.
Yes, but he got his head cut off while he was like saving the entire ship.
Like he saved the ship, and then the virus was still released, and then Nurgle used his body to walk around and fuck with Garrow, which was just rude.
Yes. But
you halfway froze for a second. I was like, please, not again. Please, not again.
I've heard you might have heard thunder and lightning in the background. We have a storm going on here.
No, here's just fucking hot as hell. So do you want to do another one next weekend?
We can. Are you wanting to pause at this point?
Yeah, we got an hour and 2, and we've touched on a lot of stuff, and I think we need to do one more to wrap it up, but I'll put out part 1 and part 2 and then part 3.
Well, because we spent most of this one talking about Primarchs and whether the Emperor is or is not a god, or whether he even has any choice in that or not.
I want to set all the pieces up for what we know before I finish Fulgrim. So that's going to be the one we do next. So that'll be fun, because I want to be like, okay, this is my understanding of the board right now, and here's where I think things are going to happen. I'll probably be wrong about some of it, but that should be very fun.
I have not started rereading Fulgrim yet, because I picked up a huge stock of books at the bookstore today, because bookstores finally reopened here this weekend.
Yay, go Canada.
And I picked up I picked up the last 2 books in the Horus Heresy proper, because those are the last 2 ones that I have to read for the first time. So I picked those 2 up. I picked up book 4 of the Siege of Terra, which I'm like halfway through reading already.
And that's like the end game.
That's the end game.
Yeah.
And a novella connected to the Siege of Terra.
Okay.
And a book on because they have the Primarch novellas. But they've also started doing novellas that I forget exactly what they call them. But the first one they did was a novella with Constantine Valdor, the Emperor's chief bodyguard.
Okay.
The second one that they're doing is with a guy called Luther, who's the first captain, or whatever his technical title is, but he's the equivalent of the first captain of the Dark Angels, who are the First Legion.
Okay, so that's okay. So book 6 really is going to take us into like the story of that particular legion before things get a little nuts.
Yes. So I believe we meet Luther in book 6, but they released a standalone novella. I don't know at what point it's set in. If it's set like the Primarch novellas and the Valdor one, it's actually set there. It's probably actually set during the Great Crusade.
Okay.
It might actually be. I haven't read the back or anything. I was just like, I should pick this up. It might actually be set. It might actually be set on Caliban, the Dark Angels' homeworld, before the Primarch of the Dark Angels is found by the Emperor. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's set before the Horus Heresy.
Okay.
Which should be interesting.
Well, color me interested. Well, thanks for watching. We're gonna have I'm gonna do a sort of side video about how I understand everything is put together, and then we can watch how wrong I am. But yes, thanks for coming, Brow. It's always awesome. We should do this more often whenever we can, because life is too damn short. So,
yes.
Good night, everyone. Auf Wiedersehen.